Good morning and welcome to Hardin Life Live. We are the Hardins. We are a family of counselors and coaches who are committed to bringing you a fresh perspective on how to live your best life, both from a biblical and therapeutic point of view. So I am here with my dad today. We are holding down the fort for the Hardins, and we are so excited that this month of October, we are talking about boundaries. And it kind of a timely subject in light of we've got a lot of holidays coming up. We've got Thanksgiving and Christmas, and these are the times that boundaries are typically needed and also crossed over, and toes are stepped on and feelings are hurt. And so we would love to start getting you in the groove of being really familiar with what boundaries are, why we need them, how to set them, why they're important. So I wanted to just first, Dad, you are one of the kings in our family. I should just say the voice in my head when it comes to boundaries and why we need them. And I typically don't love a boundary in terms of my relationships. I would just love for everyone to love each other and get along, but that doesn't always happen. So give me a quick definition of just boundaries, why we need them, why they're important.
Well, boundaries are another way of saying I need to define who I am, where I am, and where I see you as the other person being. So it is a way to define more clearly emotional proximity, is the way we might say that. Where am I emotionally? Where am I wanting to go? And how am I experiencing you as the other person? I may be experiencing you as way too close and in my space, or I may be afraid that you're abandoning me and running away. But boundaries are the call for courageous confrontation,
Mm-hmm.
or sitting face to face with another person and allowing them to know me and know how I experience them. Lots of dimensions to boundaries.
Totally. Well, I totally see boundaries as that where I start and end and where you begin. And if I have no clear definition of what that is, then it's like having a house without a fence. It's people just can end up in your yard that you don't want there, trampling your rose bushes that you've worked so hard to plant, and you're sitting there wondering, why aren't people respecting my rose bushes when you didn't have a fence to begin with that said, this is mine and that is yours?
Well, exactly. And I so much appreciated in your blog, sweetheart, that you acknowledged that the issue of setting boundaries is really an exercise of overcoming our fear.
Totally.
Fear from a number of different dimensions. And it takes a commitment to love well,
Mhm.
um, a lot of courage to set the appropriate boundary, and to know that fear is not the way that we can live our lives well. That we do ourselves a disservice when we are operating out of fear toward another person and calling that love. That's not love at all, obviously. It's self protection.
Mm-hmm. Well, it really tags along to your blog last week on codependency and why we end up enmeshed, or those boundary lines are blurred because we're being overly responsible for another person, ultimately because we're afraid that if we're not, that they will end up in a worse off place without us. And fear can have a point or a play in a lot of our relationships, and for different reasons. There's the codependency, the overly responsible, but also We can be afraid of losing the relationship. We can be afraid of hurting others. We can be afraid of the angry reaction that we'll get from setting the boundary. And it ends up actually just hurting us, because I think for the longest time that setting a boundary was more about keeping the bad out. And I didn't want really anyone that I was in relationship with to think that I thought that they were the bad. But really, when I see my healthiest display of relationship, there are healthy boundaries there, and it's more to keep the good in. It's maintaining closeness in the relationship. I am a me, you are a me, and we can encourage one another in who we are, who we're becoming, but to have a undefined me, that's where lines get blurred, feelings get hurt, and there's a lack of respect for one another as a person, their own
But
person.
certainly setting boundaries raises the question, what do I value? If I really value a relationship, I need to make sure that fear is eradicated from the relationship as much as possible.
Mhm.
If I'm operating with a high level of fear and calling that love, I am completely incongruent. That does not work. And so, what I have to do, if I really value the relationship, is face my fear of abandonment, reaction, whatever the response might be that you so well articulated in your journal or in your blog, um, and then begin to overcome that fear by facing the other person, setting the appropriate boundary that gives the most possibility of continuing the relationship and deepening the relationship.
Mhm.
And throughout my life, I've had some really great experiences of stepping into my fear, sitting with another person, setting a boundary, and it's actually increased the depth of intimacy in the relationship.
And what would that look like? What would just a simple boundary be to actually help you to move towards a person versus away from them?
Well, a simple boundary would be something that you don't like that another person is doing that they're not aware of.
Oh,
And so I would sit down, and the way that would work is I would start out, I always call it the sandwich method, bread, meat, bread. So positive, and then the issue, and end with positive. So I might say something like this. I really value our friendship. I value our relationship. And I want our relationship to continue to grow. And what would help me in it growing is if this one issue could be stopped. And then I would, explain the issue, and I don't like this and it's hurting me.
yeah.
And I would request that we could stop that. And then I would end by saying, and again, I want you to understand that the reason I'm sharing this with you is because I really do value the relationship and I want the relationship to continue.
Mhm. Totally. Well, and that can be anything. When I think about boundaries that I've set in and using your sandwich method, it's been anything from people being late and repeatedly late, and which sends the message that they don't respect me or my time. And I end up saying, oh, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay, extending grace, extending grace, extending grace, which I think that's what the Bible shows us, that we need to display grace. But the Bible also says that we let our yes be yes, our no be no. We see Jesus setting boundaries. He didn't heal everyone. So there's uh, definitely a sense that I've got to make sure that I'm feeling valued. And when I allow my boundary to be crossed, which is the expectation that someone will be there when they say they're going to be there, what ends up happening is I end up bearing the weight of that, and it can end up in resentment and frustration, which actually tears the relationship further apart instead of bringing us together. So time is the big one. Even just a sense of reactivity and tone in a relationship, that can be hurtful. So just a couple of examples there, but I definitely love the thought that boundaries are can be that simple, and it doesn't have to be this major blown up conversation. It can be like a simple trip to the dentist. That when you have a cavity, you go to the dentist to get it fixed. Will it hurt? Well, yeah, it'll hurt, but ultimately it doesn't harm the relationship. It doesn't harm the tooth. In the same way that if we were to leave the cavity, that would actually be more harmful instead of
Well, sure.
going through a little hurt.
Well, I love the way that you laid that out in your blog. And again, it takes courage to set boundaries.
Yeah.
And the good thing about boundaries is it overcomes fear that destroys relationship. The opposite of love is not hate relationally. The opposite of love is fear. And boundaries
Absolutely.
help to overcome our fears.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sitting with us, you guys. We really want to begin to address these boundaries to get you more comfortable, to make them less scary and less elusive, but really tangible so that your relationships can be strengthened in your life. So tune in next week, join us. But for this week, we hope you have a great Columbus Day and have a great week.